So one of the things we always do when we go back in time and do one of these mini seasons is take a look at the most successful movies of the year in terms of box office, like which movies made the most money. This time around, we're going to talk about absolutely one of these movies, and that's it. Um, which I just think, well, sometimes that means the movies that make the most money are not always the ones that last the longest in the public imagination. These three, I have heard of all of them, and the other two were on my short list for 1948. We just didn't get to them or didn't vote on them or whatever. But here we go. Number three, Bogey and Bacall in Key Largo.
This was on my short list too. So, because I wanted to do another bogey movie, which we are going to do one this season, but not
Yes,
this one.
that's next. So we could have had we had a James Stewart double feature. We could have had a Humphrey Bogart double feature if we really wanted one. Yeah, this one, I mean, I knew the cheesy 80s ballad by the person whose name I can't remember, singing about Key Largo in the 80s. And that's the first time I kind of knew that this was something. But like the song was about the movie.
Not the Beach Boys song, right?
No, you're thinking about Kokomo.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Which is an island that doesn't exist. Key Largo actually is a place. It's in the Florida Keys. And yeah, there was a song in the 80s that I can't remember who sang it, where he sings about Bogey and Bacall in Key Largo. And I was like, oh, that's a movie. And so I, always heard of it, but I've never seen it.
It's kind of a gangster film because it's a guy that goes to visit a friend's hotel and finds out that it's being kind of run by gangsters.
Yeah. And the Florida Keys these are tiny little islands. So they do kind of have this sense of like impending, there's pressure. You're in a very confined space when you're doing that. The next movie is Red River, which I've only seen clips from because there are clips in the celluloid closet when Monty Clift and another cowboy on the range are comparing the sizes of each other's guns. And it's very homoerotic. It's one of those things that, like in 1948, this is how we show men flirting on screen, is that we put them in cowboy boots and have them pull out their guns and like admire the weight and girth of their weapons.
I would have polished Montgomery Clift's pistol.
Absolutely.
No question.
Yes. Yes. Montgomery Clift, he was so gorgeous. And there are photos of him like shirtless on the beach in the 40s. And he's got like hairy shoulders and a hairy back. And he was always the one that was always like, well, there goes that deal breaker. Like, Montgomery Clift can be like a big hairy ape. I don't care. Like that, he is so hot. And he was family. So he knew exactly what to do with that polishing the pistol scene from Red River. I'm not much for Westerns.
I don't hate them. I like 310 to Yuma is a great movie. I haven't seen the new True Grit. The new
True Grit is awesome. I think I just didn't like Westerns as a kid because they were like manly. Ugh. And it was just one of those things like it felt like something that little boys were supposed to like. And I was a rebel against all that because I just wanted to watch Judy Garland. But I think now is if they've got a good story, a Western is fine. It's just, the whole cowboys and Indians, like I'm not immediately into that whole motif, but if it's got a True Grit, the new Coen Brothers True Grit was amazing.
Is Annie Get Your Gun considered a Western?
No, it's not, because there's a big belting diva and the Ethel Merman kind of puts to it. No. And then we're not going to have much to say about this one in the cold open, but the number one movie of the year, which shocks the hell out of me, is The Snake Pit. The socially conscious movie about a women's insane asylum that was the number one box office film of the year, more than Easter Parade, more than, some of the things that you would just expect to be like crowd pleasers.
I think people always want drama. I don't mean like high drama. I mean like drama. like New Housewives is like.
But I also think that people are stupid generally. I mean, you look at the number one box office films in history, and it's like Avengers Endgame, which, hey, was a great movie. But people, if they're not like flying through the air through the help of CGI, like we're not as interested in. I mean, a movie like The Snake Pit that was made today would not be the number one box office movie of the year. nice
to the
music.
Rewind Project, where
we're
Ali,
gonna get
Matt,
all
and
into
Eric
the
take
snake
another
pit
look at your
stuff.
favorite
So,
milestone
welcome.
movies through the lens of our present day. Will it be a skip, rent, or buy? Stay tuned and find out.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Rewind Project. We are still in 1948, and today we have a special guest with us. Good friend of the pod, Patrick Nelson, will be joining us today. So, welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Eric. I'm really excited to be here today. It's been a while.
It has been a while. The last time you were on the pod, we were talking about movies from 1969.
Yes, Taxi Driver. No, wait. Was that?
No,
No.
it was
That
not.
we
It was
talked about Taxi Driver, but the movies were Bob, Ted, Carol, Alice, and all those other people.
Yep.
And then
Midnight
Midnight
Cowboy,
Cowboy.
which was the
Ugh.
best picture winner that we gave a triple skip to.
Yes, it was. Well, 69, as you recall from our chat then, was a lot of character exposition and not a lot of plot.
Yeah, well, and just look. This is not a. You go back and listen to our Midnight Cowboy conversation if you want to hear all about Midnight Cowboy. But we didn't like it. Which hey,
It happens.
it happens. That will happen, and it's happened a couple times this season. There's been some classic films that I just thought, oh well, these have to hold up, and they don't so much.
Vertigo,
and that's okay.
So, well, today we're going to be talking about The Snake Pit, directed by Anatole Litvak, screenplay by Frank Partos and Millen Brand and Mary Jane Ward.
Okay.
This movie does have some notable achievements. So it was an Academy Award nominee for Best Picture, Best Actress in a Leading Role, Best Director, Best Writing Screenplay, and Best Music Scoring of a Dramatic or Comedy Picture.
So is that like anything but a musical? Is that what that's saying?
The Oscars keep changing this stuff up. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean that's the Oscars change their categories all the freaking time.
Well, but
yeah,
going back to the 40s, 50s, probably not until the 60s, the music in the background wasn't as extensive as it is today. That was one of the things that going back to the 69 podcast and just watching some of the other movies that you guys have reviewed over the years, there's not a lot of background music, at least nowhere near the extent there is today.
Yeah, we don't feel the need to score every single scene.
Yeah,
things
it was
can
more
just
minimalistic.
exist in silence, and that's okay. Sometimes I think we score modern movies too much.
Agreed. Americans don't like silence, whether that's that's why we fill our speech with ums and likes and all those other kinds of pickup words. And I feel like that has moved into our listening abilities in films and TV shows. And
well, it's kind of more dramatic now because it's the inverse, where like if you don't have music, then it draws your attention even more because there's something wrong. You know what I mean?
There's silence.
Much more dramatic
Yeah.
instead of the reverse, where they would add sweeping scores like for special moments to like draw your attention to the moment. It's kind of flipped. This movie also did receive an Academy Award for Best Sound Recording. So they threw him an award.
Okay, they got a technical award, which I'm
good for them.
All right, fine. So we can say the Academy Award winning The Snake Pit because the person who was holding the microphone,
it's an honor just to be nominated.
Well, and 5 nominations. Actually, 6
wins.
Nominations. Yeah, 5
and some big ones. And Best Director, Mr. Anatole Litvak. I don't know if that name sounded familiar to you, Maddie, but he also directed Sorry, Wrong Number, which we just talked about, 3 movies ago. Yeah, not everyone was fond of that one. So anyway, as soon as I heard his name, I was like, we've talked about him before, and I didn't realize we'd talked about him like literally a month ago.
Yeah.
I thought maybe I'd see something from seasons past, but no.
Recent. And another a female lead driven movie. So
yes.
That's another very interesting, especially for 1948. So the plot itself is about a mysterious woman who encounters relationship issues due to long-seated emotional problems from her childhood that force her into a mental institution for help.
When the movies get serious, Matt stops with his like snarky plot statement.
I honestly couldn't find anything snarky to say about this.
I know.
This
This
is a
was
really
very,
well done
yeah.
movie.
Without being like super duper offensive to anybody
Yes.
who has mental health issues, this would have been hard. Yes.
Yes.
I agree there. It was so intense from almost the moment it opened until she walked out the door.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
spoiler alert: she leaves the academy.
Yeah, we don't fuck with spoilers here. You've had 75 years to watch this movie, so if you haven't seen it before you listen to us, I'm sorry, but yes, she does get out. I was all ready for this movie to be all about somebody who was imprisoned in an asylum in an unjust kind of way, and I was like, I was all ready for her not to be that crazy. And in the very first scene, she's hearing voices that are clearly not there, and I was like, okay, she has mental health issues. She does need help. Whether or not she's going to get the kind of help she needs in the snake pit, we will see. But she wasn't a sane woman who just could do all this on her own.
And it took a long time to actually get to the snake pit.
Yeah.
And I was really fascinated. This was a kind of a precursor to weaving multiple timeline stories together and giving you the reveals at the right time. And I was really impressed with that for the timing. 75 years ago, we weren't that great at storytelling in films that were more complicated than boy meets girl, girl meets whatever, and everybody lives happily ever after. But this one, I really I wish they had talked a little bit more about some of the other things that had happened in her past, like her father and the first gentleman she was going to marry. Boy, did they look alike! And you know, could we have drawn some more parallels between them other than just the quick, he cared for you kind of piece, or no, with him it was the
Punctuality.
yeah,
You have to be here at 8:30.
yes.
To the point where I thought, as she was remembering stuff, that it was the same person that was the guy that she was dating and her father.
I thought
Because
that too.
yeah,
Partly
Like-
because they look so much alike.
So you thought it was the same actor?
I thought it was the same actor.
Yeah.
Oh, it could have, that could have been an interesting way to, with maybe some prosthetics so that we know they're actually not the same person. This is not a story about incest, but I will say that I walked into this movie totally expecting a very socially conscious picture all about the way that we need to reform our mental health processes. And I got all that, but I was way more interested in the whole mystery as to what is causing this particular character to have these mental issues. What are the mental issues specifically and why?
But
You know,
don't you think that's more of a 2023 way to look at mental illness? Because that's not what they were looking at that deeply in 1948.
well, I think that honestly they were probably doing that a little bit more in 1948. Now we're so soon to say, well, is it a chemical imbalance? Do you just need medication?
Okay.
And we have more medication, so that's helpful. But I think sometimes having it doesn't mean that that's always the, I think that in 1948 there was always something caused this. You weren't born this way. This can't be, and it was a fault of yours, right? If you had mental health issues, it was somehow either your fault or somebody else's fault. Whereas now we know that chemical imbalances kind of exist.
Well, but I mean, they really did promote the idea of psychoanalysis in this movie, which was ultimately what helped cure her. I shouldn't save is not the right word. Helped cure her.
Yes. And she had to be a part of that. What I liked about this is that she couldn't just sit there and, go through therapy. Like, she had to be brave enough to remember some of these things. And sometimes she needed a little bit of hypnosis or, chemical help to open up the doors to some of these painful memories. But once they were there, when he was done, he was like, you'll see me tomorrow and you'll remember our entire conversation. He had to bring some of this stuff into her consciousness, but she also had to, go through it. Like, it wasn't easy for her either. And I liked all that.
Yeah. Well, and as we talk about the she here, let's talk about Olivia de Havilland as Virginia Stewart Cunningham.
So she was so good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
She was so good.
We remember her as the wife of Ashley Wilkes in Gone with the Wind most, or at least for me. I'm not a huge fan of this era, but this was very different and not what I remember her, from my youth watching her in that other movie. But she just, I, I read some of the history after the movie, and she went to shock therapy. She went to
Mhm.
hydrotherapy. Anything that was in the movie, she went to see it happen, and she obviously brought that into this character and this particular production. I'm just amazed at the depth of her ability.
Yeah, when we first started it, I wasn't too sure, especially as we meet her and Grace in the courtyard. But as we go through the movie and we start to do that memento style jumping back and forth, and you build the pieces together to understand what's going on, I really start to see the depth of who she is and the difference in personality as she's jumping back and forth between, I don't know, lucidness and kind of insanity. And
Well,
it's
even
even the voices in her head too. Just
and
it was
even
really
the
good.
different periods that we go back to view, the current day, the time that she was with uh, Robert, and then the time that she was younger, young with her family. But funny you bring up Memento. While I was watching the movie, that the movie Memento kept going through my head. I wonder if there was any type of inspiration from the Snake Pit for Memento, because it was also a mental health type of
Mhm.
movie.
That's an interesting question, because like Memento, actually I guess Memento is more like this movie.
Yes.
As she starts to put the pieces back together, she does it as we get more pieces, and I didn't really think about that parallel until you started talking about it earlier. Like, she recovers her sanity as she starts to remember more, and as the audience gets more of the story of her life.
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
the movie was beautifully told. It really was.
It was.
Yeah.
Both of
Well,
them,
and one of the
actually.
things that I was
Yeah.
really impressed with, I didn't do a ton of research, but I did go back and watch the TCM introduction where Ben Mankiewicz has like some guest star on, and they're just kind of talking about why this movie matters. Anytime I see those on YouTube and it's a movie we're talking about, I watch them because they're really instructive. And the thing that they said about her is that she was just really dedicated to this idea after visiting all of these asylums and all these women. It's like, it's not just a bunch of screaming lunatics when you go in there. These are just like real people who are struggling, and she really kind of became very sympathetic to the fact that yes, they needed help. They couldn't just exist in a healthy way outside of a psychiatric institution, but they were just people, and she really wanted to get that across. She didn't want to play any moment. And so even when she's, meeting some folks and she was like, oh my God, this is a jail. And what have I done? And I'm here for research. And she doesn't quite know where she is, or she can't even really remember yesterday. She doesn't do it with these like wide, crazy eyes and this kind of thing as if to say, hey, I'm playing crazy. Give me the Oscar. She's just playing a woman who just can't remember yesterday, but she's and she just brings a real humanity to it. I was just so impressed by her from the very beginning. And again, the very first scene, she is not well,
Mhm. Yeah.
clearly
No.
not well, and yet doesn't play it like, weird, crazy woman. And I love the fact that when they're saying, everyone get in a line, she's like, why do we need to get in a line? And as an audience, you're like, I don't know why you need to get in a line. I just got here. But so did she. But so did she in a way, because she
Mhm.
can't remember anything else, and so it really does kind of put you in that, and so you empathize with her. It's like you say, Matt, it's not just the performance, but it's also the script and the direction. I mean, it just is really, really well done.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny that you mention it. I couldn't put my finger on what I liked about the character of Virginia Cunningham, because most of the time, crazy is crazy, and we all have enough crazy in our lives. But exactly because she didn't play it crazy, like you just said,
Yeah.
it made Virginia that much more likable, and I was rooting for her
Mhm.
to recover and to be able to walk out that door. And had she played it even slightly in that, I'm going for the Oscar crazy, it would not have been as effective.
No, she was very sympathetic the entire time because it's a woman that doesn't know what's going on, but she's desperately trying to pull it all together.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Next up is Mark Stevens as Robert Cunningham, her husband, which that started to get curious as we start to learn more about her history. And I'm like, wait a minute, is she already married? There's like so much mystery going on about her as to her previous life. I was like, this could get real housewives, like with like the amount of craziness that could go on. I mean, not insanity. I mean, just the ridiculousness that could happen. And I like the fact that she didn't end up being married from some other marriage and stuff like that. This was actually her first marriage. Now, how she ended up in Chicago, I guess was just for the book, but like creating this relationship of like dating two people, that was something that I still can't comprehend. But I like the fact that she found somebody like Robert who really was there for her, like was not somebody that was overbearing or anything. It was kind of an interesting character, I thought.
It was much more of a courting in the traditional sense than
Mhm.
it was I'm looking for a wife. And I
I
think
mean,
that showed in their relationship, even though she was starting to walk down crazy lane, he never he was never forceful. And maybe that goes back to the dichotomy between how her father was both rigid and loving, and the two men that she ended up with were two sides of that coin as well. So we got to see the more loving piece of a relationship, the slow. I don't. Slow burn's not what I'm looking for, but it's just a slow increase in the two of them becoming a couple, rather than
mhm.
just I'm going to marry you.
Well,
They actually
sometimes the
got to.
most loving thing you can do for anyone is just exercise a little bit of patience while they work through their shit. And that's, I think, exactly what we saw from him. One thing I'll definitely say about Mark Stevens is that he was in this movie. He had some scenes. Boy, he sure was.
Yes.
I didn't find his character to be all that interesting, to tell you the truth. I mean, I think he was kind of a one note, perfect, supportive husband.
Mhm.
It would, I mean, not that I have, and the movie's not about him, so that's fine. Like, it doesn't take away from my appreciation of this film. But I think that when he was sitting with the doctor by himself and starting to tell the story, it might have been interesting to see him struggle a little bit too. Like, is she ever going to get better?
Yeah.
And it's hard being married to this woman. I mean, it's just and keeping this love alive when she doesn't remember who I am half the time and doesn't quite believe that I'm her husband
I,
every time I see her again. I mean, that shit's hard. Like, I didn't see him really struggle. He was just kind of very perfect and patient and loving the entire time, which made you feel good when she got out at the end. But I think that if the movie had been about them as opposed to about her, maybe he would have been more interesting.
but I don't think this movie is about men at all. I think this movie
No.
is all about the women involved,
Mhm.
from Virginia to Nurse Cratchit. What was her name in the movie? Nurse Davis, to Mrs. Stewart, her mother. You know, it, even though the relationship with her father was a really big deal for her mental breakdown in the future, we don't see him as much in the past flashbacks as we do her mother. We don't see her interaction, other than Dr. Kick, we don't see her interaction with with the men as much as we see her interaction with the nurses and the other female patients, and the relationships that she has with Nurse Davis and with Hester and the Gracie at the beginning. We don't see, the only relationships we see are almost even tangential, because she never really talks to Robert, especially when she's in the hospital. Um, but we don't see her talking to the first fiance, and we don't see her talking to her father very much. Most of the dialogue she has is with the women, again, with the exception of Dr. Kick.
Yeah, and I think we're saying the same thing. I mean, I think if the movie's not about them, so it's
Yeah,
fine. It's
yeah.
about
To me,
her.
the men in this movie were lackluster. They
Yeah.
were. I
Huh.
didn't I
See,
didn't
I'm going to diverge there because as soon as we talked about the next man on the list, whew, He
Well,
flooded my basement in a big way. But yeah, Robert was just kind of there. And that's fine. I mean, she had a loving, patient husband. And if that's the story they wanted to tell, that's great. They did that. I think that any man in his situation, even somebody who was just really, really in love with his wife and wanted to do everything to help her, this is hard. It's hard on
Yeah.
the partners as well. I mean,
yeah,
especially the partner who is sane, who has to go out there and hold down a job and just deal with, real life and kind of, and then, here's your spouse who you love more than anything, who is just not all there right now. It's tough. It's a tough thing to do. And we really didn't get his struggle. And, that's okay because it's her movie.
I guess I was just happy to see a guy in a movie that wasn't a dick, because that's generally what all men are in
Yes, we
most
deal
movies
with a
in
lot of trash men
1940.
on this show, and he was the opposite of that. And I think, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want him to have devolved into trash man status unless that was the story they wanted to tell. But I do think that, you can be a sympathetic partner, man or woman, and still have a moment to struggle. I wouldn't have wanted him to take it out on her at
Mhm.
all.
Yeah.
But there were a couple moments when he was alone with the doctor where he just could have said, God, this is tough. And it would have made, and just see the facade drop a little bit. And that would have made him, I think, a little bit more interesting, but it's a small little quibble.
Yeah, I think the trash human in this movie was definitely Nurse Davis. She was
Who had her own stuff, who was also interesting, as we'll get to.
yes, yes, and she still took that out on not just Virginia, but other patients
Sure,
that we saw her interactions
sure.
with.
Well, since you've already brought up Nurse Davis, let's talk about Helen Craig and her performance. I think it's interesting, and I hadn't thought about this until you just mentioned it, that like all of the female authoritarian relationships in her life are contentious. I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Her mother, all the nurses, the only people that she really has a civil relationship or friendship with are people that are in the same position that she is. But all the authoritarian ones, always contentious. That's really interesting.
Well, and I think it's who we put a spotlight on too. That first nurse who greets her at Ward 1, I was like, okay, this is a nice one.
Yeah.
Of course, she does help hold her down and put her into a straitjacket later, but only because Nurse Davis is saying, this is what we're going to do. So she's got to obey orders as well. I mean, I didn't hate all the nurses as nearly as much as I thought I would. And I was expecting whoever the main doctor figure is going to be in all of this, I was like, he'll be an evil asshole. And he wasn't. It wasn't a complete takedown of the entire infrastructure around mental health, but it did say, yeah, we've got some problems. And one of the big problems is that they're just completely understaffed, which I get it. Like, I can see why if you're a nurse and you've got 3 colleagues and you're trying to manage a floor of 60 psychologically ill women, like that's a tough job.
Well, I mean, and throughout the movie, they meant a couple of times they mentioned that we've got more people than this hospital was designed for. They keep adding more
Yeah.
and more
Yeah.
people, and so there's no place to put them. It's kind of like prisons today, where we just keep stuffing people into them, and that's kind of what they were doing with these asylums.
Yeah. And I like the fact that this movie was kind of even-handed in that way. I mean, it always was Virginia's movie, and it's not Virginia's fault that they're, stuffed to the gills. But it's also really not the doctors and nurses' fault either. It's just they're in this impossible situation. And what do you do?
Well, and you can see that they are stressed throughout this whole thing. That it's not. I mean, at a point, they just kind of become callous, because how else do they deal with this and make sure everything gets done? I totally understand that. I do think Nurse Davis, though, was a little bit too strict. She was just shy of being a villain. She could have shown a little bit more compassion towards Virginia.
Oh, yeah. Oh, here's a typewriter. Go ahead, write. I'll watch. How much of a writer can you be if you can't watch while I'm
Yes.
looming over you? Just write something. I mean, yeah, she was crazy.
She caused that breakdown.
I would say she is a villain in this situation. While it's not a superhero movie, she is definitely not helping the matter,
No.
and even if she didn't cause it, but she's certainly not using what a good bedside manner, as we would say in the 20th century.
At the same time, though, it was interesting that Virginia saw why. And like
Yes.
totally as a writer, she probably was just observing everything and just realized, oh, you're in love with him.
Yes, but that doesn't give her a pass.
No, it
It doesn't give
doesn't.
her a
No.
pass, but it does give her a motivation, which does make it interesting.
Mhm.
You know, to me, it's not like I'm not saying that this little plot detail makes Nurse Davis a sympathetic figure by any, stretch of the imagination. But it is interesting when a movie doesn't make, oh, let's just put an evil nurse in there and she's evil because she's evil. And we're never going to bother to explain why. This particular nurse had a big old crush on the
Mm.
doctor who was spending a lot of time and energy to try to make Virginia in particular well.
Yeah.
I believe because he actually thought that Virginia could get better. And so,
Yeah.
while he's got a lot of patients that are probably never going to be fully well, he was like, he had hope for this one. So he thought, okay, let's do what we can do. But just the fact that he was giving her a little bit of extra attention and he was kind to her made Nurse Davis's blood boil,
Mhm.
and that was enough to just make her really not like this one patient. And also, I got the sense from Nurse Davis that she had been promoted to head nurse of Ward 1, which is the best ward because these are all the women who are going to get out someday and they're all on the road to recovery. And she's looking at Virginia, and Virginia isn't quite up to the level of all of her other patients. And so there's this kind of weird superiority complex about Ward 1. It's like, oh, I'm going to send you down because you don't belong here. It's this almost, quick thing about is really utilitarian way of kind of looking at all these patients and saying, Dr. Kick might think you're going to get better someday, but I don't. So let's just hasten your departure to get you out of my hair so I can focus on all these other patients who deserve my time. But not really seeing her humanity. And that's why, because we're watching this all from Virginia's perspective, we just hate her, as we should. She's terrible, but she's
Well,
terrible with reasons, which I think is interesting.
I mean, but it humanizes her. So at a
Yes.
sense. So I mean, that's kind of the thing that you don't get from the rest of the nurses because you don't get any story with them. But at least now
No.
you get an idea of like why these nurses seem stressed out. Like these are people that are having to deal with a lot of stress during the day.
But all the
So,
other nurses actually seemed fine until they were
eh,
commanded not to be fine, and then they did what they needed to do.
some of them hustled people through. It really there was a range with the nurses,
Mhm.
and it just really depended upon the situation, which again is very human. So
Yeah.
I really appreciated that. Just like, when they showed all of the different patients that were there was a wide range of like from quiet to loud to just I mean, they were trying to show the spectrum of, or I guess at the time what they thought would be the spectrum of insanity. So I actually appreciated that too, that it wasn't just all loud gibbering in the
Yeah.
entire time, which is what I
Mhm.
would have expected.
And the loudest one that at least that stood out to me was speaking either Russian or some other Slavic language and standing on a chair, and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, that one's different." But there was a very broad spectrum, and then when we got to the dance, we got to see the male versions of all of them. Well, not all of them, but a couple of the male versions as well, and that was interesting. And speaking of the dance, and not to push the conversation in a direction, that was an interesting thing. I did not know things like that happened in psych wards back in the day, and I I when they first walked into the room, I thought, "Oh, they're gonna go see a concert," 'cause there was, like, a violin warming up in the background, and, "Oh, and then, oh, look, the men are gonna come in, and they're all gonna listen to some beautiful music," and then it was a dance? It was like, "Holy crap.
Well,
This
see,
is
you were thinking
something
that,
new."
Patrick. I was thinking in terms of the movie, I was like, "Oh, some shit's gonna go down now. What
Well,
the fuck are they doing?"
but that was my second thought, but the first one was like, "Oh, what is this?" But yes, as soon as you mix the men and the women from their own particular psych wards, it's just a recipe for insanity on crack.
And yet, there was nothing bad happened at the dance.
No.
Like, that was the
No,
thing, is that I was like, I
no.
was girding my loins for
Yes.
something really terrible to happen, and it didn't. I mean, it's just, and these things happened, and this was a real thing, from,
It
that era of mental health treatment, and it was fine.
And there was some even minor comic relief in how Virginia handled the one guy that kept coming up to ask her to dance. She's like, "Oh no, we've already danced 3 times," and I was like, "That's kind of funny," you know.
Well, I think the scene ended up being a really good moment of growth for her, so that
Yes.
you can see that she's actually getting well, even though she's been dropped in, Psych Ward 33, which has got to, hopefully, is towards the end of the numbering system that they're doing.
You'd think.
So it turned out to be a really good storytelling moment in her character development. It was
Yeah.
again that this movie is just really well
And by the
done.
way, she was really taking care of Hester at that moment.
Yes.
Which I know she's not on your cast list because she literally had one line in this entire movie. But that woman, I looked her up. Her name's Betsy Blair, who played Hester. If she'd been nominated for Best Supporting Actress, I would have been all for it.
Yeah, I would
Her
too.
face was just she was stunning. She was so great.
Yeah.
I wish they had explored that relationship even just a little bit more. It came to, I guess, a peak in that dance because she was trying to take care of Hester while the craziness of the dance was going on, and she kept trying to keep her in her sight or dance near her. And I really would have liked to have seen just a little bit more of why she felt so attached to Hester. And the movie covered some of it, but it was such an interesting relationship that I almost felt a little cheated by not getting more of it.
I think in motivational terms, she saw somebody that was less sane than her because she could recognize that it was one pushing her forwards towards her own recovery, but she wanted to help somebody else in that moment.
Mm.
And I also think that it's a sign of mental wellness when you can look outside yourself for a moment
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
see that somebody else is
absolutely.
suffering and really try to help them. That's the sign of good mental health. And so it's just kind of one of those things that, again, I'm sure Hester's whole background and what, drove her to be the way she is could have been a really interesting story, but this one is about Virginia, so
True.
that was good enough for me.
Before we get too off track, let's go back and
Too
let's
late.
talk about Dr. Mark Kick, played by Leo J.
Oh, let's talk about Dr.
yes.
Mark Kick. Holy shit. Our hotness correspondent is not here today, but oh my God. Like very well cast though, because,
Yes.
not only was Nurse Davis kind of pining for him, one of the things that Virginia says towards the end of the movie is that I know I'm getting better because I'm no longer in love with you, and so she was doing a little bit of projection on this ideal man in her life, and this very kind doctor who had her best interests in mind and did, I mean, that's a form of love, right? Is
Mhm.
to have someone else's best interests at heart. And she's not ready to leave yet, but she is ready to leave now, and he just wants her to have a good life. He's a doctor, but he's also just, I mean, oh my God, he would have been very easy to fall in love with.
It's interesting because throughout the movie, I thought that maybe he was developing feelings for her, and that was part of the reason why he was continually pushing for her recovery.
Because we're not used to seeing men being kind to women without an ulterior motive.
Yes.
That's why.
But I was so happy at the end when she makes the statement, "I'm no longer in love with you," and he says, "I know," but you get the sense
You never
that
were. Yeah.
that he knew what was going on and used it to help her. And so he wasn't taking advantage of her at all either. And I was just like, oh, wow, this is really, I love this moment because that's not what I was expecting to happen.
And if this movie had been made today, there would have been a movie where she leaned in for a kiss because that's what she was. And he would have had to have said, no, 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 no. And redraw the professional boundaries and maybe hurt her feelings, which might have set her back a little bit. It almost kind of helps that it was taking place in 1948, where she really had to wait for him to make the first move because he wasn't going to, because he was a doctor. Right. I mean, it kind of simplified the story. It might have, it would be an interesting wrinkle if you did it today, because women today would flirt more than a woman in 1948 would.
Two honorable mentions when we're talking about cast. Celeste Holm as Grace.
There is never enough Celeste Holm. I was so sad when she went away.
I was too, that we didn't get to see her again.
Because she's so good. And, she won the Best Supporting Actress Oscar the year before. So she was a big deal when they made this movie. She won the Oscar for Gentleman's Agreement, which we talked about last year at this time.
I'm surprised that, I mean, I guess they didn't want to make it about a buddy movie, going through rehab together, I guess. But it was just kind of surprising you never ever see her again in the movie.
No,
Well,
no,
it also could have been made before at least filmed before she won the Oscar.
that's
So
possible. That's possible. It's one of those things that it felt a little bit to me, a little bit stunt casty, though, because you do remember her. I think if it hadn't been either somebody without without her charisma, or maybe without her star value, because her name was pretty big on the poster.
Mhm.
Again, that could have been post filming, and it could have been like, holy shit, one of our bit players won an Oscar. Let's put her name on the poster. That it very well could have been a business decision. But the fact is that Grace is at the beginning who Virginia becomes at the end. So making her memorable just kind of says, it is possible to get out of here. I mean, she's in Ward 1. She's about to leave. And then she does leave soon after. And we never hear about her again. But it does kind of put this North Star in the movie where you can kind of, Virginia can get there if she works at it. And maybe Grace was as bad off at some point as Virginia is in her opening scene.
And the next honorable mention is Natalie Schaefer as Mrs. Stewart. And for our listeners who don't know who Natalie Schaefer is, she was Mrs. Lovey Howell on Gilligan's Island.
I am learning that in this moment. Holy shit.
The first time she showed up on screen, I had that, wow, she looks like somebody. And it dawned on me, wow, she kind of looks like Mrs. Thurston Howell III. But I didn't go to IMDb to look, so I did not know that either. But I'm not
made
surprised.
That connection ever. Holy shit! I wouldn't even put her in my cast list because I've been like, oh yeah, she was the bitch mother, whatever. She was Lovey Howell. Holy shit!
Yep. So, are you guys ready for some fun facts?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. So first up, Jean Tierney was the first choice to play Virginia. She was replaced when she became pregnant.
And she actually went on to star with Leo Genn in Personal Affair about 5 years later. So they did get to have a movie together.
Well, and Jean actually got the love scene, so she won. I loved Olivia de Havilland in this movie. Like, I will never say a bad thing about her. I also love Jean Tierney as an actress. If you've never seen All That Heaven Allows, she is the most gorgeous creature to ever be on film, ever. And she's an amazing actor. She was so evil in All That Heaven Allows, and then completely not in some other films that I've seen her in. So she's got a lot of range. She's amazing. I'm sad that she wasn't able to do this. And also it's ironic because Jean Tierney had a very tragic end with her own bouts with mental illness later on.
Interesting.
So it would have been an interesting kind of piece to her legacy had she left this film behind. But again, Olivia was so good.
And I appreciate that Olivia de Havilland is more the girl next door. I think it made her more accessible in this movie. I think if Jean Tierney had done it, it would have been a little bit more sensational. So,
well, Olivia Havilland, she got her Oscar for The Heiress, which she was supposed to be, the plain rich woman that Montgomery Clift seduces. And of course, any one of us would have been seduced by Montgomery Clift, so go for it. She was the less beautiful Melanie in Gone with the Wind when you compared her to Scarlett O'Hara. She kind of had that plain Jane persona. And so even for audiences who really knew her, I think that helped as well. She was lovely, but she wasn't a stunning beauty in everything she'd ever done. And people knew that. And she was also an actress who was not afraid to be a little plain on screen.
Well, and she works with it very well. I mean, she uses it to her advantage on screen, I think. Anatole Litvak, so the director of the movie, he took this material very seriously. So we talked earlier about Olivia de Havilland, going and doing research on this. A lot of that was because of Anatole Litvak's demand that the entire cast and crew accompany him to various mental institutions and to lectures by leading psychiatrists to do research for the film for like 2 months. He was hell-bent on making sure that they told an accurate story of what was going on, and so people understood the material that they were producing.
Which I really admire. And when you tell that story, Matt, all I can think about is, why'd they call it the snake pit? I mean, I understand when you watch the movie, how
Yeah.
she likens Ward 33 to a snake pit, and how that actually kind of that scared straight kind of piece to it. But I think one of the reasons why I was ready for something real campy, real over the top, I was ready for a lot of Olivia de Havilland's crazy eyes and all that kind of stuff that I didn't get, was because the name of this movie kind of leads you to that.
I think that's intentional. I think they wanted to get as many people into the movie. And how do you get people to see the movies? They go to see something sensational. They want to see drama. And that's what they were selling. And so when they get there, they actually get this really incredible story about a woman's recovery from a mental health issue that
And
they
it's so
weren't
funny though, had it
expecting.
not been for you and this show, I don't know that I would have ever, I'd heard of the Snake Pit for years. It's just a film that people talk about and I've heard of, but I had no interest in seeing it. Absolutely none. And when you picked it, I was like, well, that'll be fun. It'll probably be campy. It'll be fun to talk about, even if I have to sit through it. And then it ended up being really good. It's so, yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I think it was a business decision in 1948, but it has not helped its legacy, I don't think. Because I think more people
No.
might see this today if it was a real, human drama about a woman who gets better, as opposed to the Snake Pit.
I either give you a THX 1138 or I give you the Snake Pit. It's one or the
yeah.
other.
They could have called it Ward 33.
They could have
Yes.
called it Word, which to me
Or
though,
Five Angry Nurses.
So Olivia de Havilland, as you mentioned earlier, she actually did go and witness hydrotherapy, electroshock treatments. She went to and sat in on therapy sessions, all with permission from the therapists themselves. And she did attend dinners and dances, to the point where a film critic actually questioned whether that dance scene was real or not, or something fictitious that they made up for the movie. She actually called the critic and told her about her experiences to let her know that no, this is actually something real that goes on. And I've actually attended them.
I read that too. And to add to the interesting facts, it was also filmed at a mental ward at a state hospital in California.
Yep.
Most of it, which just kind of brings me back to that beginning, the introduction with Grace, and the thought that she was going into a zoo, and you get the pan of the women behind bars on the second floor, and it was like, oh, okay, so this is all nice and sweet. She's talking with Grace, but then we get the, oh my God, they're going into a weird situation. I don't know why that just came to me, but
yeah, I thought the sets were, I didn't know that it was actually filmed at a psychiatric hospital. But it makes sense because the sets were kind of chilling. I mean, and the close-ups on the locks and the keys were, of course you have to secure patients in a psychiatric facility, but it can't help but feel like a jail. And we never talked about at the dance, that song that they sing, Going Home.
Yeah.
That was so moving.
That
And just,
jumped out at
and
me
the
too.
pan against all of these people who they just want to go home. I mean, it was so simple and poignant and just, yeah, really, really sad. That was just kind of a moment that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. It was not what I was expecting when I clicked play.
Well, and it seems so real that all these people, when they hear that, like, they want to get out. I mean, they don't,
even the
wanna
ones who
be
are
there.
never going to get out.
Yeah.
What they would really like more than anything else is just to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really tragic.
One last tidbit. This is not a fun fact, but an interesting fact. Due to public concerns with the extras in the film, when this movie was released in Britain, the British Censory Board added a foreword explaining that everybody inside the movie was a paid actor, even all the extras and everything. And the conditions inside British hospitals are not like this that are portrayed in the film. That their mental health treatments are different than America's, and this is truly just an American problem. Essentially, they were that concerned.
Okay. I want to fact check that. I want to see in 1948 if the Brits were actually that much better.
Are you guys ready for a game?
Absolutely. I am. I always love this game.
So this game is going to be called Back to Juniper Hill, which was the name of the asylum that they were at in the movie. So we're going to recast this movie. Okay, we're going to redo it. You can update it for 2024, or you can go back to the past. Doesn't really matter. I want you to cast Virginia, Robert, and Dr. Kick. And then what do you change about the film? Patrick, you're our guest today, so why don't you go first?
Okay, so I thought long and hard about this. This is a similar game that we played for the 1969 movies, and my first thought for Virginia was Margot Robbie, mostly because she's just hot right now.
Mhm.
But then I was like, wait a second, I need somebody that can be dowdy, and I'm not sure Margot Robbie's the right person.
Helen
So-
Mirren would say no.
Helen Mirren aside, love her to death. I would choose Emma Mackey. Emma Mackey played Maeve on Sex Education on Netflix, and she was Jacqueline de Belfort on Brannick and Christie's Death on the Nile, the most recent version that was done about 5 years ago. She is absolutely stunning when she's in
Glammed up.
couture and wearing tiaras and diamonds, but also in the Netflix Sex Education show with Gillian Anderson. Can't remember the boy's name, and then the young gay kid who is now going to be the new doctor on Doctor Who, starting today, or the day we're filming. But she in that show, while she was pretty, she wasn't stunning, and her acting ability to go from the evil Jacqueline de Belfort to this Maeve character, she could definitely play Virginia. For Robert, not that I wanted to go back and pull from that same movie, but from Death on the Nile and Murder on the Orient Express, Tom Bateman, who played Buck, Poirot's kind of half-assy, crazy sidekick. He is handsome enough, and I think charming and can play graceful enough to be a Robert Cunningham. But I had the hardest time coming up with a Dr. Kick because I wanted somebody who had that sex appeal, but also had that intelligence. So Matt Damon, as he has gotten older, has become, just he's just as handsome as he was when he was Good Will Hunting, but he has that intelligence and experience now to be a Dr. Kick.
Eric, how about you?
Okay, well, I'll start with what I'm going to change because when I cast my first two people, I realized that I had already cast two Irish actors, both of whom can do an American accent very well. But then I thought, what if I just had an Irish cast? So my Virginia, I kept looking at women and they were all too old. Because when you're looking for someone who can play a really strong, dramatic role like this, you're kind of looking for people who've got a bit of a resume. And I was continually picking people who were just a little bit too old for it. I did decide that if you're going to do, I decided also to do it in a modern day kind of context. And today, you wouldn't have that many women who were 23 and married. That's just that doesn't happen nearly as much anymore as it did in 1948. So I'm okay going a little older. So my Virginia, I'm casting Saoirse Ronan because she can do anything. And between Little Women and Lady Bird and all the other stuff that she's done, and Hannah, and she's got a huge range. And for Robert, I wanted somebody who, again, I think if you were going to do it today, it's not going to be about them. It's still going to be about her, but I will include a few things that just kind of show that he's also struggling with this whole journey, that it's not easy to be the husband of somebody who is, clearly not well in a mental institution. And I cast Barry Keoghan, who is, a lot of people are talking about him right now because he's the lead in Saltburn, the new Emerald Fennell movie, but he was also in the Banshees of Inisherin.
Great movie.
And he's not, he's kind of got this look about him where he gets cast to play a lot of awkward people. But in Saltburn, he's actually playing someone who I think is supposed to be a little bit more attractive, and he can act more attractive. And I think that, again, as a loving, patient husband would be a different kind of role for him because he usually plays oddballs. But I think that he could probably do it, and it would be a character that you would root for. And then Dr. Kick, I was thinking, okay, who's like the hot doctor that would be hard not to fall in love with? Because I think in a modern day setting, like I said before, I would include a scene where maybe she makes a move and he has to say, no, 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 no. Here's where the boundaries are. And if I was already casting Irish, well, Colin Farrell just seemed like the obvious choice to put in that one. So I would actually set the movie in Ireland. The Irish people do have quite a mental health crisis. 1 in 4 people are people who've dealt with suicidal ideation and depression. People are wondering if there's something that's genetic. They're wondering if the Great Famine, altered genes somehow to make people generationally a little bit more susceptible to mental illness. I say this is someone with Irish ancestry myself. It is something that when you compare Ireland to the rest of Europe, there is a need for mental health resources. And so, it'd be interesting to do a little bit of research and figure out if any of those things are actually impacting care, and to talk about them. And one of the things that this movie didn't do that I think I probably would want to explore is how does class play into all this? Who gets treatment and who doesn't? Who gets relegated to Ward 33? And based on whose family has a bunch of money. We heard that one woman in Ward 33 who claimed to have a bunch of money. She also claimed that she owned the Hope Diamonds. So who's to say? But yeah, that would be my take. Would be a film taking place in Dublin in 2024 with Saoirse Ronan, Barry Keoghan, and Colin Farrell in the leads.
Love it. So I did something a little bit different. I'm going to move the movie a little bit forward. We're going to go to the late 60s, early 70s. My Virginia is going to be played by Zoe Kravitz. I love her on screen every time. I never have seen her in a dramatic role like this, and I think she could really do it. I would love to see her switch back and forth. My Robert, who's going to have a little bit more problems with what's going on, like we talked about earlier, I think he does need to have more of a character to be conflicted, is going to be played by Adam Driver.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think he will play he's one of those, he's sympathetic, he's kind of good looking, but not like next door. He's not traditionally good looking.
Sexy ugly.
Yeah.
It's kind of the Barry Keoghan.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I am going to reunite Adam Driver with John David Washington from my Dr. Kick. So they were in Black Klansman together. They work really well together. And John David Washington, I think, is that presence on screen that I could see him playing the psychiatrist that is really trying to help Zoe Kravitz. And I think there's more of a relational thing there where, she is probably, someone of mixed race or something like that. And I think that there are some more dynamics that way that could actually play out in this movie as well. That could be very interesting, I think, especially when it comes to talking about class and who actually gets mental health treatment. So I want to stretch it a little bit more because in the late 60s, early 70s, I think treatment had improved more, but we are still dealing with a lot of racial tensions too, which I think actually be a little bit more interesting in this movie. Well, that brings us to skip, rent, or buy. So skip, I can't remember having seen this movie. No, thank you. I don't want to watch it again.
I blocked it out.
Rent, I'll try some analysis to see if it helps. And so anything interesting, I'm glad I tried it. And then buy, throw me in Word 33 and help me see my sanity. So let's reverse it. Eric, you go first.
This is a movie that really tells us that skip, rent, or buy is not really the perfect way to say how you enjoyed a movie, because I can't see myself buying this one and turning it on every year as a big annual tradition. I mean, part of it was painful to watch. I think it's a rental for me, but it's just a really strong rental. I appreciated this movie. This was a really, really good film. And if anyone, again, like we say a lot with rentals, if anyone ever came along and said, "Oh, I've never seen it," I might say, "Oh, I really recommend it. And if you want to watch it with me, yes, I will certainly, sit down and sit through it again." But it's not one that I'm, because of the subject matter, because of just how good it is at exploring these difficult topics, I'm not burning to see this one again. I'm not going to fire it up twice just to watch it one more time. So it's a very, very, very strong rent from me.
Okay. Patrick?
And I hate to say this, but ditto. It is not something I would put in my iTunes movie collection, but like Eric said, the acting is amazing. The filmography, the cinematography at different points was very uh, just stunning and good. Like watching the opening pan of the zoo, quote unquote, and then there was one point where there were shadows on the wall that were just incredibly powerful for me. And then, even though that snake pit was obviously 1948 special effects, it still made an impact. And if there were a rent plus or a buy minus, this is exactly where I would put it. It is something
This is where Allie would give this one a rent with a buy rising. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, that's actually perfect. Rent with a buy rising. I would, like Eric said, would watch it again with somebody just because it is so well acted. It is a great story, and if you have seen Memento, you can see the threads that are pulled into that 21st century movie. And I would definitely say, if you are going through 1948 movies, this is one that you don't miss.
Agreed. Yes, I am a very strong rent with a buy rising. I generally try not to do that. This, like you guys said, this is not a movie that I would probably put in my collection. But if somebody was asking me for a film to watch, I would highly recommend this movie because it is just so well done. I mean,
Yeah.
great pacing, great storytelling, very well acted. You have in some sense, a minimal cast because you are really just dealing with a few people and you're watching them grow, or one person grow. I really did love this movie by the time we were done. But I don't know that I would just sit down and watch it again by myself.
Agreed. I would not have watched it had it not been for the pod.
And I loved the fact that, Patrick, we could have you here. I am sad that Allie missed this conversation, and I hope she sees it. Like, I hope we can tell her, like, you really do need to watch this movie. It's very, very good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. And Patrick, thank you for being on the pod today.
Thank you for having me. This was a great movie to be part of. And while I enjoyed being on the 69 version, those movies were not as good as this one.
Yeah. I mean, we've already watched several movies this season that were not as good as this.
I know.
Well, that's it for us today. And please join us again next week when we will be watching The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
We don't need no stinking badges.
With that, I'm Matt.
I'm Eric.
I'm Patrick.
Be kind, rewind.
You've been listening to The Rewind Project. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Google Play. Please subscribe and rate us. It helps a lot. We love your comments and questions. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and via our new phone number at 202-618-2402. Thanks for listening. Be kind. Rewind.
You just gave me my punk band name, Five Angry Nurses.